Good morning, everybody. There you go, just to make sure you're awake. I was feeling we need like one of those skip intro things on Netflix there. I'm set, we can get going. But it's not Netflix, this is live. You can't change the channel. You can't pick what you want to watch this morning. We're carrying on this series called Choosing Love. And I want to ask you just to be honest with yourself and be honest with me just for one moment. Do you ever, and you don't need to tell anybody, you just in yourself, just think about this. Do you ever hold people to a higher standard than you hold yourself to? Do you ever do that? Do you ever find yourself thinking about people, maybe it's a politician or a person in position of power or leadership, and the expectation or the standard that you expect them to live to is higher than the one that you would live to yourself? When you hear stories of people who mess up, who make mistakes, are you surprised or outraged at how they did such a thing? How could they be so greedy, or how could they go and just focus on themselves? How could they do what they do? Are you surprised by the hypocrisy that comes out from people? And I am, and I'm sure you are, and there's something good in that. But often we can think to ourselves, when we hear these stories of people who are in positions of prominence who mess up, we can think to ourselves, well, I would never do that. And that's something that's so easy for us to say, but how do we know? You know, we're not in their shoes, we're not in their position, we don't face what they face, we've not got the temptation that they've got. And sometimes we sort of project this stuff onto other people and think, well, it's awful for what they've done, and yeah, there is, and those sort of things. But what about ourselves? Do we hold people to a standard that we are not willing to hold ourselves to? Now, there's a value that's really important in our culture. It's a value that is really important that we want in other people. And again, if we're being really honest, you don't have to tell anybody, you don't have to admit this, but just admit it to yourself. Sometimes, or often, I think this is a value that we want to see in other people, but perhaps we don't necessarily think, well, I need to work on ourselves. And it's simply integrity. Integrity is a value that's so important and it's so crucial. It's so needed in our world today. And it's something that we want in other people, as I said, but we tend to think more about it in relation to them and what they're doing than we think about it for ourselves. Having integrity is about being honest. It's about being truthful. It's about having or acting in an ethical manner. Having integrity is about having strong moral principles that you stick to. And this is something that we want in people in a position of leadership. This is something that we want in people who are in a position of power. And of course it is, because integrity is a crucial value. If you're in a position of leadership, if you're in a position of authority or power, you need to be a person who has integrity. And we'll talk about that and we'll unpack that, but there's something to think about that when we project this onto other people. Is this something that we're willing to actually turn the microscope on ourselves and think about ourselves? You know, am I a person of integrity? Am I honest? Do I act in an ethical manner? Do I have strong moral principles that I live by and I live according to? You see, we're really quick to put people on pedestals and to elevate them and to shine a spotlight on them, but we're also quicker, I think, to knock them off those pedestals when they make a mistake, when they have that fall from grace. Now, we're in part 3, as Jim said, of this Choosing Love series. We've been exploring the book of Ruth. You can find the book of Ruth in the Old Testament. It's a short book. It's narrative in nature. It's telling the story of this lady called Ruth. There's only 4 chapters, and in each week, we're just sort of covering each of those chapters. And what we've discovered so far is that in chapter 1, Ruth is a Moabite. She's from Moab, and she married the son of a lady called Naomi. They left Bethlehem and they went to Moab, and that's how Ruth finds them and gets married. But Ruth's husband dies, as does Ruth's brother-in-law and father-in-law, which leaves Naomi as a widow without any sons. And that's not a great situation to find yourself in the ancient world. Your rights and your income all came through men. If you were a woman and had no sort of husband or sons, then you really didn't have any rights. You didn't have any protection. And there was famine and drought going on in the land. So Naomi decides to leave Moab to go back home to Bethlehem. And in this amazing act of loyalty, Ruth decides to go with her mother-in-law, that she leaves her homeland and she leaves all that's familiar to her to go with Naomi back to Bethlehem. And they arrive in Bethlehem and they've got no food, they've got no source of income. And in chapter 2, so we discover that Ruth does what the only thing she can do. She goes out, it's the harvest time, she goes out and she gleans behind the workers in the field. That's a practice that actually God told the nation of Israel to do. When you're harvesting, don't harvest your fields right up to the edge of the fields. Leave some space for people who are poor or the foreigner, people who don't have stuff. Leave some stuff that they can look after themselves. Or as you're going and you're harvesting the grain and you drop stuff, just leave it. Don't pick it up so that people can go behind and pick it up after you. And that's what Ruth did. And it's hard, it's dangerous, it's backbreaking work. But fortunately, she found her way to Boaz's field. And Boaz is a relation of Naomi. And it was a dangerous thing to do, but Boaz is a man of upstanding character. He's a nobleman, and he protects Ruth. He prays blessing upon Ruth, and he provides for her. And at the end of chapter 2, we see a very different contrast from the start of chapter 2, where there's sort of very little hope. They've got no means of income, and by the end of chapter 2, they've got some security and they've got some stability. So that's you're up to speed now. That's the recap on the series. We're going to pick up the story at the start of chapter 3, and it says this. One day, Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you will be well provided for. Now, Boaz, with whose women you have worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight, he'll be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you're there until he's finished eating and drinking." Well, I think it's pretty clear what's going on here, what Naomi's asking of Ruth. She's basically saying, Ruth, I want you to make yourself look as good as you can, and I want you to make yourself smell as good as you can, and then I want you to go and meet with Boaz and basically make a good impression on Boaz. You know, it's a little bit strange, and so Ruth is taking dating advice from her mother-in-law. Well, anybody done that? Now, it's a little bit strange, but okay, let's go with that. And it's a bit odd. Some of these things think, oh, okay, but it's like a first date. So Ruth is sort of going on a first date with Boaz, just that Boaz doesn't realize that he's going on this first date. And she does what you would do when you're going on a first date. You sort of make an impression. You put your best clothes on. You at least brush your hair and brush your teeth and maybe put deodorant on. But when you've been married for 25 years, that sort of stuff, well, okay, maybe, but that sort of stuff, you don't take everything the same way. But this is the first date. So Ruth wants to make a good impression on Boaz, and Naomi instructs her to do that. So let's read on, see what happens. When he lies down, Naomi says, note the place where he's lying, then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do. Now this is starting to become a little bit awkward and a little bit strange. So Naomi says to Ruth, right, I want you to make yourself look good, I want you to smell good, and then I want you to go and watch Boaz, but watch from a distance. And after he's worked, and this is a common practice of what they would do when they would thresh and they'd harvest, and you'd have these piles of grain, and the workers would sleep out by their piles of grain to protect them, to make sure that they don't get stolen until they can be harvested the next day. And it's hard work and it's hot in the evening, so just sleeping out in the cool night of air. So do that. Go make yourself look good. Look on from a distance. And when Boaz goes to sleep, note where he goes to sleep, because you don't want to mix him up with somebody else. There are people dotted all around this sort of place. It's secluded, but know where Boaz is. Then go and uncover his feet. What does this mean? Now, some people think this is a euphemism for uncovering more than his feet. I know this is slightly awkward, especially as this is Naomi's, Ruth's mother-in-law. He's saying this. I want you to go to Boaz, wait for him to lie down, and go out to him and uncover his feet. See, Boaz would have been in a cloak, and uncovering his feet, some people think means actually more than uncovering his feet, because as you uncover his feet, you potentially expose more aspects of his body. Is this what Naomi is getting at? That you could say, as you read through other bits of scripture, that this is interpreted in elsewhere, that it actually means more than his feet. Well, we don't know. We'll read on. But whatever is going on, this is a daughter-in-law and a mother-in-law conversation. Think about what's the most difficult conversation, the most awkward conversation you've had with your mother-in-law? I bet it's nothing like this, but that's what's going on. Naomi says, I want you to do this. And, what's going on? What's at the heart of this? Now, some people don't think this is a euphemism for something else. Some people think, well, actually, what the text means is exactly what the text means. It's just uncover his feet. Boaz is out sleeping in the cool of the night air, and if you're sleeping and your feet are exposed, then you're going to gently wake up. So don't go and startle him. Don't go and do anything that's underhand or improper. Just go and uncover his feet, and then he'll wake up, and then he'll tell you what to do. Again, that's a bit strange. Let's read on. I'll do whatever you say, Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor, and she did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. So she did that. She watched on from a distance and saw where he was working and saw where he went to sleep. When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. And Ruth approached him quietly. She uncovered his feet and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man, and he turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet. Now, can you imagine being Boaz? I love the way he says that. In the middle of the night, something startled. I'm pretty sure something did startle Boaz. He's just there minding his own business, working hard. He's had something to eat, he's had something to drink, and he's gone to lie down. And then this lady comes and uncovers his feet, and it wakes him up. And he's sort of startled by this. This is a bold, and this is a risky move by Ruth. Whatever is going on here, there is the hint of scandal that is going on. What would happen if somebody saw? What would happen if somebody saw Ruth creep up to Boaz whilst he's asleep and uncover his feet, even if she's only just uncovering his feet? What would they say? What would the speculation be? I mean, it's scandalous. It would be all over the Bethlehem Beagle. Instagrain would have blown up with the it's good, isn't it? Instagrain. I'm here all week. With the posts of this. Did you see what happened down at the threshing floor? See Ruth and Boaz and all this sort of stuff. Even if there's nothing going on here, the sort of the scandal of what's implied or what might be implied could actually just spread across the whole place. But actually, the real issue isn't what would happen if somebody saw. The real issue, I think, is what would happen if nobody saw. You see, Ruth and Boaz are in a secluded place. They're in the middle of nowhere, really, and there isn't really, there are people around, but it's dark and all this sort of stuff. They're in private. And Boaz wakes up, and he's had something to drink, he's had something to eat, and lying at his feet is this woman, just there. Boaz can do whatever he wants to do, and nobody would know. And actually, in this place is a place where lots of this stuff happens in their culture. This goes on. Boaz basically has a free pass to do whatever he wants to do. Nobody would know. And actually, it's not just Boaz who has a free pass here. Ruth has a free pass. She could push the boundaries. Maybe, and perhaps she is acting with full integrity. She is doing everything above board. That there's nothing more going on to this. There's nothing more scandalous than exactly as it says. But Ruth has an opportunity just to push it a little bit more, to put Boaz maybe in a compromising situation that actually she could then use to her advantage a bit later on. The real issue isn't what happens if people see. The real issue is what would happen if nobody saw. And the reason for that is integrity is shown through what you do in private, not in public. Integrity is shown, integrity is discovered through how we live when nobody is seeing, when nobody is watching, not when we are on the platform and the light is shining onto us. It's easier to act with integrity when everybody's watching, but integrity is found through the stuff that we do when nobody is watching. Who are you behind closed doors? Who are you when nobody is watching? Is there a disconnect or a big disconnect between your public and your private persona? Of course, there's going to be slight differences. Of course there is. But is there a massive gap between who you are in public, who you are at work, who you are with your friends, who you are with your family, who you are in your small group, who you are at church, compared to who you are when you go home and you shut the door and nobody can see and nobody can hear and you're just on your own? Integrity is shown through what we do in private, not what we do in public. And, Boaz and Ruth are in a compromising situation. There's temptation to do something that they probably know they shouldn't do. And of course, Boaz is tempted. Well, one, he's a bloke, he's got a pulse. But of course, he's tempted. The whole thing about temptation is it's tempting. You want to do it. You could put me in a room and close a door and put a plate of mushrooms in front of me. I will in no way be tempted to touch those mushrooms. I mean, who wants to eat slugs? They're disgusting. Nobody wants to do that. But put a slice of cake or a banoffee pie in front of me, and that's a whole new ballgame. I'm tempted then to actually eat it, or those sort of things. Why? Because, I want to do that. Integrity is found in not sticking your thumb in the banoffee pie when nobody is watching. It's the perfect crime. But integrity is found through actually, I'm not, who I am in private is as important, if not more important, than who I am in public. So what's going to happen? I mean, if this was Netflix, it's like a real cliffhanger moment. It's the end of an episode, and you're like, quick, I've got to jump on to watch the next scene. There's Ruth is lying at Boaz's feet, and Boaz wakes up, and he sees Ruth. What does he do? How does he respond? How does Ruth respond? Let's read on. Who are you? He asked. I love that. I'm your servant Ruth, she said. Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guard and redeemer of our family. We talked about this a little bit last week. If you missed any of the series so far, you can catch up on YouTube or fbcnext.com. And, this is, again, a strange thing. Just picture the scene. Boaz wakes up, he's startled, and he says to Ruth, who are you? What are you doing lying at my feet? I'm your servant Ruth, she said. And then, obviously, the next conversation is exactly right. Spread your garment over me, because I'm a little bit chilly. Now, this is, again, there's more than just share your blanket with me. Ruth is proposing to Boaz. You're a guardian redeemer of our family. Again, that's part of their law and their customs, that if a family member of yours is in need, then you have a responsibility to look after that family, to provide for them, to use what you have to help them with what they haven't got. And Boaz is related to Naomi, so Ruth is sort of saying, playing the guardian redeemer trump card. So she's saying, spread your garment over me. Spread the garment of your protection and your provision over me. Marry me, basically. Provide for me and provide for Naomi. It's so romantic, isn't it? It's not at all. It's not the most romantic proposal that there's ever been. It's not a beach with roses and a string quartet playing softly in the background and a hidden engagement ring. It's sort of like, I'm tired. Oh, I'm cold. Will you marry me to keep me warm? But there you go. And, this whole thing about the guardian redeemer thing is an interesting thing. Again, in their culture and their customs, there was this practice of if your brother dies and he was married, but your brother's wife, your brother's widow, I'm getting confused in all the relationships, has no children, then you should marry her so that she can bear children, or more particularly sons, so that your brother's line can continue. That was something that was part of their customs and their culture. But actually, it's not there in Leviticus chapter 25. We see some of the rules or the obligation for the guardian redeemer. It's got nothing about that in there. So this sort of thing, this proposal that Ruth is asking of Boaz. How is Boaz going to respond to such a romantic gesture? How would you respond in that situation? The Lord bless you, my daughter, he replied. This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You've not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character. We see something of who Ruth is through what Boaz is saying. Boaz is flattered by this. Ruth she wants a husband, she needs a husband in order to survive and be provided for. And she could easily have gone after younger men. She could have easily have gone after somebody else, but she didn't. Boaz is flattered by this. But we see something of her standing in the community that she's only just begun to call home, that the people of the town know Ruth, and they know that she is of a noble character. Just like Boaz, we read right at the start of chapter 2, is a man of standing in his community. Let's read on. Although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of our family, there's another one who's more closely related than I. Dun, dun, dun. It's like a love triangle. Yeah, I am related to you, but there's someone who's closer to you. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good. Let him redeem you. But if he's not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning. I mean, again, this is a strange cliffhanger moment that we can't quite get our heads around the situation. But Ruth has proposed to Boaz, and Boaz says, yeah, okay, that sounds right. But there's another guy who's closer relative to Naomi, and actually he has to have the right to choose to marry you before I do. So we're asking tomorrow, and if he doesn't want to, I'll marry you. Sound all right? Yeah, great, sorted. I can't even begin to get my head around this. You know, the world of Boaz and the world of Ruth is thousands of miles and thousands of years away from ours. There's so many things that just don't work or translate into our culture. But the way that they act actually is something that we can learn from. Let's not take dating advice from Naomi or the book of Ruth. I'm not sure it will go well. Do not propose in the same way that Ruth proposes to Boaz. That's not really going to help us in our world or our culture today. But how they live and how they act actually has a lot to say to us. Let's read on. So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized. And he said, no one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor. Now, again, this is interesting because if what they're doing is fine, if it's all above board, why go behind people's back? Why act in secret? You know, why does Ruth have to get up and leave before anybody is up? It's like a one-night stand, isn't it? Creeping out the house before anybody notices. Nobody must know that a woman came to the threshing floor. What's going on in this situation? Well, again, in their culture, the threshing floor was a place that was common with prostitution, that the guys who were working out in the field and would eat and drink and then would make use of prostitutes in that place. So what would happen, again, if somebody had saw Ruth leave? You know, what would they saw Ruth, this woman of noble character, noble standing in the community. They saw her leaving the threshing floor in the morning. Well, they'd put one and one together and come up with 5. Well, obviously, Ruth is a prostitute. That's what they would think. Or what if they saw this lady leaving, but they couldn't recognize who she was? And well, actually, that's where Boaz was. Boaz was sleeping there, and then this lady leaves. Well, they put one and one together and come up with 6. And think, well, Boaz has obviously slept with a prostitute. And both of their reputation, their character is at risk through these sort of things. You know, if I'm honest, I don't think there is anything underhand going in this text. And I can see why people have read into it and apply those things. And I know there's a whole bunch of odd things going on. But I think that Ruth and Boaz act in a way that's fitting with their character. They act with integrity. If I do have questions, the question I have is with Naomi. Now, why would Naomi say this to Ruth? Why would Naomi put Ruth in this compromising situation and put Boaz in this compromising situation? Surely there was another way. You know, was Naomi expecting more to happen than actually what happened? I don't know, and you know, we don't have enough information on there. But all we can look at is how does Ruth and how do Boaz act in this situation? You know, last week we asked this question: what does love require of me? This week we need to ask this question: what does integrity require of me? You know, integrity is simply doing the right thing, even when it's difficult or it's unpopular to do. Integrity is being honest and truthful, even when it's easier or more beneficial to lie or to do something else. You know, integrity is about acting in a way that is consistent with your values. You know, integrity is in desperate need in our world, just as it was in the world of Boaz and the world of Ruth. But the thing about integrity is integrity isn't something that you can just do. Integrity isn't something you can just discover. Integrity isn't something you can download. You can't go on a course and here's the ways that you can have integrity. Just do this and you've got it. Integrity is something that is forged through those trials. The thing about integrity is you do not know you have it until you need it, until you find yourself in that situation. But having said that, here's a couple of things just to think about as we think about, well, am I a person of integrity? How do I grow and how do I continue to forge that in myself? Well, firstly, integrity is about knowing what your values are. You cannot live a life that is consistent with your values if you don't know what your values are. Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever taken some time to actually pause and ponder and reflect, what is really important to me? Who is the person that I want to become? Not what do I want to do. We think about it all the time. When you're bigger, when you're grown up, what do you want to do? I mean, that's important to think about those career and those aspirational goals. But what's the type of person you want to be? Who do you want to be? What are your values? Now, if you're a Jesus follower, surely your values are aligned with Jesus' values. If you're a Jesus follower, if you've said to him that I want to live my life the way that you would if you were in my shoes, if you've accepted in my shoes, if you've accepted Jesus' invitation to follow me, that means that you've accepted that invitation and that challenge, I suppose, to be more like him, to be like him. So actually adopting those values into our lives. A bit later on in the New Testament, this guy called Paul, who was one of the leaders in the early church, and he wrote lots of the letters that we find in the New Testament. He wrote in a letter to the church in Galatia, and he talked about the fruit of the Spirit. And he was saying, like, if you're a follower of Jesus, if the Spirit of God is at work within you, and that's what happens when you choose to follow Jesus, then there's a few things that will happen naturally because God's Spirit is there. This fruit will be evident in your life. And it's a natural thing. It comes with following Jesus, but it's also an intentional thing. It doesn't, whilst it is natural, it doesn't just happen like that. It's something that we have to work at. And Paul sort of lists these things called the fruit of the Spirit. It says this: the fruit of the Spirit is love, it's joy, it's peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. I think these are a great list of values to have if you're a Jesus follower. These are the things that we are called to live like. This is who we're called to be, that we're called to be people who are full of love. We're called to be people who are full of joy, who are full of peace and patience, who have kindness in the way that we act towards one another, who are good in what we think and what we say and what we do, who are faithful, who are trustworthy, who have gentleness and have self-control. I mean, we see that through Boaz and Ruth in these things. The point is, what I'm trying to say is that if you want to have integrity, you need to figure out what your values are in order for you to live by them. But there's more than these behavioral values. There's other stuff. Like what about, what's more important to you, your family or your career? That's a value. How do you live a life that's consistent with that value? What about things like the environment or justice or the importance of fun? That's a value that's important to me. How do I live my life in a way that's consistent with those things? You have to work out what your values are in order to live consistently with them. The second thing that we need for integrity is to surround ourselves with people of integrity. I love this quote by Andy Stanley. He says, your friendships will determine the quality and the direction of your life. Your friendships will determine the quality and direction of your life. If you're a parent of teenagers, make sure your teenagers know this. Your friendships will determine the quality and the direction of your life. Who we spend time with influences who we become. So if you want to become a person of integrity, spend time with people of integrity. It's not rocket science at all. And the third thing that we need in order to have integrity is to know where you're at risk. Know where you're at risk. Know where you're at danger. We are all one bad decision away from disaster. It's so easy to point the finger at people who have fallen from grace and made a mistake. But we need to recognize that we are all one bad decision away from disaster. There's all just one choice that we can make that would either cause everything to come crashing down or set us off on that slippery path to self-destruction. Where are you most at risk? I think we all have a fatal flaw. We all have aspects of our lives or temptation that actually is strong for us, that if we gave into that temptation could cause everything to come crashing down. Your temptation probably isn't my temptation. We're different. Where are you at risk? Where are you vulnerable? What is your fatal flaw? Be aware of that. And as you're aware of that, then don't put yourself in a compromising situation. Boaz and Ruth were in a compromising situation, and they were able to act with integrity. If I'm honest, I think it's safer to not put yourself in that position in the first place. So don't be on your own late at night or overnight with that coworker. Don't put yourself in that position where you could take the money and nobody would know. Don't put yourself in that situation where you could cheat on the exam to get a better grade. Just don't put yourself in those places. Know where you're at risk and put guardrails in place to protect yourself. But knowing where you're at risk is also about knowing your limits. Know how far is too far. Know what that is for you. Again, we're all different on these things. An easy example of this is alcohol. How much do you want to drink? Know that before you find yourself in a situation where somebody is saying to you, do you want another drink? That is not a place to make these moral, integral values. It's not a place to make those decisions about where's the limit for me. We need to make those decisions in the cold light of day so that we can stick to it when we find ourselves in a situation where we're tempted just to go that little bit further than what we want to do. So these three things: know your values, surround yourself with people of integrity, and know where you're at risk. If you stick to those things and live to those things, then actually you will find yourself being people of integrity, just as Boaz and Ruth was. We're going to get the band back on stage just as we wrap up this time together. Now, the reason we're talking about this is because this stuff is important to Jesus. As we see the life of Jesus and we see what Jesus said and we see what Jesus did and we see sort of like the expectations that he put on us if we are followers of him, he wants us to be people of integrity. So that's why it's really important to actually learn from this stuff, learn from people like Boaz, learn from people like Ruth and what they did when they found themselves in a situation. And yet, of course, the context and the culture is very different from our context. The culture is very different from our culture. But how do we apply these things so that when we find ourselves in a situation where we're tempted just to do that thing that we know we shouldn't do, but if we're honest, we really want to because that's why it's temptation, then actually we're able to act with integrity? Because that's part and parcel of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And you don't have to be a follower of Jesus to recognize the importance of being a person of integrity, of living according to those values, of being honest and truthful. It's something that we see is so desperate in our world. As a parent, I want to be a parent that's full of integrity. I want to model that to my kids so that they can do the same. As a friend, I want to act in a way that has integrity, that helps people around me, that doesn't cause them to hinder. As a boss or a co-worker, I want to do something in a way that helps and blesses people, that doesn't cause people to stumble or puts them in a compromising situation. I don't want to take advantage of people to actually benefit myself. I want to be a person who lives according to these principles and these values because I see them all over the face of Jesus. He calls us to be people of integrity. And just like he talked about last week, that he calls us to be people of love. Anything that he calls us to do, he equips us to do, that we can stand before him and say, I want to live like you. Would you help me? Would you give me the inspiration and the courage to do that? But that still comes with that response where we have to take that first move and to take that first step. Let's stand together and let's pray together. Father God, again, I thank you so much for the example of Ruth and Boaz. And we recognize, Lord, there's so much in their story that we just don't understand, so much that we can't comprehend, that is so different from our world and so different from our culture. But help us to see those things that we can apply, those principles that we can choose to put into our life and our customs and our culture. And I thank you for their integrity. I thank you for Boaz and the strength of character that he had to do what is right. I pray you'd help us to be the same, to do the same, to know where we're at risk, to know what our limits are, and to put guardrails in place so that we won't be easily compromised. Help us to trust you and to faithfully and obediently follow you into the situations you lead us. And as we do that, help us to be people who are full of integrity, not just people who expect it in others. Let it start with us. Bless us, Lord. Amen.